You know those Instagram photos of snow-covered cottages that look absolutely magical? Well, I hate to break it to you, but living through an Edwardian winter was nothing like that cozy, filtered fantasy. The early 1900s in Britain was literally the deadliest time in history to face a harsh winter. Historians estimate that during particularly brutal Edwardian winters, as many as 1 in 15 elderly or very young people simply didn't survive until spring. That's not just uncomfortable, that's fighting for your life. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. All right, let's head back to rural England in 1905. Trust me, it's going to be quite a ride, but first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. So, congratulations. You just woke up in a small Edwardian farm in Devonshire. The first thing you notice is how damn cold it is. Not like, ooh, let me grab a sweater cold. More like, I can see my breath hanging in the air above my bed cold. Your nose feels numb, your fingers are stiff. Unlike your warm bed right now, you've been sleeping on a horsehair mattress that retains about as much heat as a sheet of ice. The only warmth comes from the heavy wool blankets piled on top of you. Not 1, not 2, but often 4 or 5 thick, scratchy layers that weigh you down like a medieval torture device. Now the really fun part begins. You need to get up, but everything in your body is screaming not to leave the relative warmth of your bed. The floorboards, bare wood, mind you, not your plush carpet, might as well be sheets of ice, and there's no thermostat on the wall to crank up before your feet hit the floor. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a ceramic hot water bottle that was filled before bed. Probably not, though. Those were more for the wealthier homes. Instead, you might have a brick that was heated in last night's fire, wrapped in cloth and tucked under the covers. By now, it's stone cold. Looking around, you spot frost patterns on the inside of your window, not outside. Inside, the glass is so cold that the moisture from your breath has frozen into delicate fern patterns overnight, beautiful in a way that makes your bones ache just looking at it. On the wooden chair beside your bed sits the clothing you'll need to put on, and here's where Edwardian winter survival begins in earnest, with layers, so many layers. First comes the woolen undergarments, not the soft, comfortable merino wool base layers we have today. This is rough, scratchy wool that feels like you're wearing a cactus, but it works. The Jaeger company made wool undergarments that were popular year-round. Cooling in summer by wicking away sweat, warming in winter by trapping heat. You pull on woolen drawers, that's underwear to us modern folks, then a woolen undershirt or chemise. Already your skin is red and itchy, but that's better than freezing to death. Next comes the shirt or blouse, then perhaps a waistcoat or vest. Women would be wearing several petticoats. On top of that, a thick woolen jacket or dress, then a shawl or scarf wrapped around your neck, woolen stockings, heavy leather boots with perhaps newspaper stuffed in them for extra insulation, and finally a wool cap pulled down over your ears. Getting dressed took forever, but once you're bundled up, you're ready to face the day inside your own house. If you're planning to go outside, you'll need even more layers. The first job of the morning, lighting the fire. And this isn't just for comfort, it's literally the difference between life and death. The kitchen range is the heart of the Edwardian farmhouse. Black iron, massive and multi-purpose. It serves as stove, oven, water heater, and the primary source of warmth for the entire home. But first, you have to light the damn thing. This means dealing with the ashes from yesterday. Kneeling down in front of the cold stove, you scrape out the grey remains of yesterday's fire. Careful though, there might still be hot embers buried deep, and the last thing you want is to set the ash bucket on fire. The fine grey dust gets everywhere, your hands, your face, your clothes. But waste not, want not, these ashes will be saved. They're useful for everything from polishing silver to making soap to fertilizing the garden. Next, you need to build a new fire. You start with crumpled newspaper, if you're lucky enough to have it, then small kindling sticks arranged carefully to allow airflow. On top of that, you place coal. Wood was becoming scarce in many parts of England by the Edwardian era, so coal was the primary fuel. Black, sooty, dirty coal that left residue on everything it touched. With freezing fingers, you strike a match. The paper catches. You wait anxiously, blowing gently when needed, adding more kindling bit by bit. This isn't a quick process. It might take 15 minutes of careful tending before the fire is properly established. But once the coal begins to glow red, you know you've succeeded. The iron range will slowly, gradually begin to heat up. Homes during this period had no insulation as we know it today. Walls were often just brick or stone with plaster directly on top. Windows were single-pane glass that leaked air through poorly fitted frames. Heat disappeared into the frosty morning air almost as quickly as the range could produce it. But there were clever workarounds. Heavy curtains would be drawn across windows and doorways to create smaller, more manageable spaces to heat. Screens might be placed around the seating area near the fire, creating a pocket of relative warmth, and everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, knew to stay close to the kitchen when possible. The kitchen is finally warming up now. Time to think about breakfast. This is where you really see how different Edwardian winter survival was from our modern experience. There's no popping to the store for fresh fruit in January. There's no ordering takeout when you're too tired to cook. For the Edwardians, winter food came from what they had preserved during the harvest months. Open the larder, that's the cool storage room that serves as a natural refrigerator, and you'll find rows of preserved foods, pickled vegetables in glass jars, salted meat hanging from hooks, apples and root vegetables in wooden crates carefully arranged so that any spoiled ones can be quickly removed before they ruin the rest. But the real breakfast staple was porridge, oats cooked with water and perhaps a splash of milk if the cows were still producing. Thick, hearty, and above all, hot. A bowl of porridge would warm you from the inside out and provide slow-burning energy for the morning's work. You spoon the porridge into bowls for the family. Maybe there's a bit of precious sugar or jam to sweeten it, saved for winter mornings just like this. The luxury of butter depends entirely on your dairy cow and how well she's faring in the cold. While breakfast is being prepared, the men of the house are likely already outside, beginning the critical morning chores. Winter farming wasn't about growing, it was about survival for both humans and animals. The livestock needs attending first thing. Their survival depends on it. The horses, cows, pigs and chickens all need to be fed, watered and their living spaces cleaned. This is no small task when water freezes overnight and hauling fresh hay means trudging through snow or mud. Picture a farmer making his way to the barn before dawn, lantern held high, breath clouding in the frigid air. Inside, the animals stir at his arrival. Their body heat has made the barn slightly warmer than outside, but it's still cold enough that water troughs have a layer of ice on top. The first job is breaking that ice so the animals can drink. Then fresh hay must be distributed, manure cleared away, and the overall condition of each animal assessed. Is anyone showing signs of illness? Is the pregnant ewe doing well? These observations could mean the difference between prosperity and disaster. Meanwhile, back in the farmhouse kitchen, the day's domestic work is beginning in earnest. The range, now fully heated, becomes the centre of activity. A large kettle of water sits on top, providing hot water for washing dishes, clothes and people, though full baths were much less frequent in winter for obvious reasons. Perhaps bread is being baked, the smell of it filling the small house with promise. Large pots of soup or stew might be started early, simmering all day to be ready for the evening meal. Root vegetables, carrots, turnips, potatoes form the base of many winter meals, supplemented with whatever preserved meat or dried beans are available. By mid-morning, the household is fully awake and engaged in their winter tasks. Children might be tasked with keeping the fire fed, carrying in more coal or wood as needed. Women are likely engaged in endless winter sewing, mending clothes, darning socks, perhaps working on quilts or blankets for added warmth. Outside, if the weather permits, men continue with winter farm maintenance. Fences need checking and repairing, tools require cleaning and sharpening in preparation for spring. The hayrick, carefully constructed months ago, is partially dismantled as hay is brought in for the animals. The hayrick itself was a marvel of engineering, built specifically to keep winter feed dry. It sat on staddle stones, mushroom-shaped pillars that prevented rats and mice from climbing up and contaminating the food. The rick was thatched on top with reed or straw, creating a waterproof roof that would shed rain and snow. Its sides sloped outward, directing water away from the precious feed inside. Around noon, everyone gathers back at the house for the midday meal, often the largest of the day during winter. Working in the cold burns, tremendous energy and hearty food was essential for survival. A typical meal might be a thick vegetable soup with chunks of salt beef or bacon served with bread still warm from the oven. The fat and calories weren't counted. They were celebrated as necessary fuel. The Edwardian farm kitchen has its own unique rhythm during winter. Without refrigeration, cooking strategies had to adapt. In cold weather, a cold larder might be set up in an unheated room or even outside a window in a special container. Leftover food could be stored there safely for a day or two. Meanwhile, the warmest corners of the kitchen held crocks of slowly fermenting foods, perhaps cabbage turning into sauerkraut or milk culturing into cheese. These fermentation processes continued even in winter, providing vital nutrients when fresh produce was scarce. After the midday meal, there might be a brief respite, a moment to warm chilled hands and feet by the fire before returning to the afternoon's tasks. Children of school age would have trudged through the snow to the village school earlier, carrying hot potatoes in their pockets both as hand warmers and as part of their lunch. For those working the farm, the afternoon brings more of the same. Endless maintenance, care and preparation. Every task is made more difficult by the cold. Metal tools stick to bare skin. Fingers become clumsy in thick gloves. Daylight is precious and fading by mid-afternoon. As the winter sun begins its early descent, thoughts turn to bringing the day's outside work to a close. Animals need a final check, extra hay for especially cold nights, making sure water hasn't refrozen. Tools must be put away, not left to the mercy of overnight frost or snow. The farmer makes one last circuit of the property, checking that everything is secure. Winter storms can arise suddenly, and a gate left unlatched or a roof not properly fixed could spell disaster by morning. The lantern's glow creates a small circle of light in the gathering darkness as he makes his final rounds. Meanwhile, inside the farmhouse, lamps are being lit. The early darkness of winter meant that precious fuel, lamp oil or candles, had to be used for more hours each day. Most families conserved by gathering in one room, sharing the light and warmth, often working on small handicrafts or necessary indoor tasks well into the evening. The rhythm of an Edwardian winter day was dictated by light, weather, and necessity. From the first reluctant emergence from warm beds to the final banking of the fire at night, every action was part of a carefully choreographed dance of survival. The brutal winter wasn't just endured, it was actively fought against with knowledge, preparation, and community support. As the afternoon fades into evening, activity in the Edwardian farmhouse shifts. The kitchen range is still the centre of domestic life, but now it's being prepared for the evening meal, perhaps the most important social time during the dark winter months. This is when family would gather, when stories would be shared, when the bonds that helped everyone survive were reinforced and strengthened. Outside, the last of the daylight disappears behind frost-covered hills. Inside, the warm glow of firelight and perhaps a few precious oil lamps creates pools of golden light. Another day of winter survival is coming to a close, one day closer to spring. As the weak winter sun finally climbs above the horizon, the real work of an Edwardian farm day begins in earnest. The initial morning chores are done, fire lit, animals fed, breakfast eaten, but that was just the prelude to the main symphony of winter labour that filled the daylight hours. Farming didn't stop when the growing season ended. In many ways, winter work was more demanding, more critical, and definitely more uncomfortable than summer tasks, and it was absolutely unrelenting. On this particular Devonshire farm, the cows need milking next. Unlike modern dairy operations with their heated barns and mechanical milking machines, Edwardian milking was done by hand, twice daily, no matter the weather. Picture a small stone outbuilding, perhaps warmed slightly by the bodies of a half-dozen cows. The milkmaid or dairyman sits on a low stool, head pressed against the flank of the cow, hands working rhythmically as breath creates clouds of vapour in the frigid air. The milk froths into wooden or metal pails, still warm from the cow. This warmth is fleeting, though. In severe cold, milk could begin to freeze before it even reached the farmhouse. And let me tell you, the hands of the person milking might as well be blocks of ice by the time they finish the last cow. There's a reason the Edwardians had a saying, "Cold hands, warm heart." When your fingers were perpetually frozen, you had to believe there was some benefit. Milk was immediately strained through muslin to remove any debris, then poured into shallow pans and left to sit so the cream would rise to the top. In winter, this process happened in the coolest part of the house, often a dedicated dairy room or pantry with stone floors and good ventilation. Cold temperature was actually an ally in dairy work, slowing the natural souring process and giving the cream more time to separate. While the dairy work continues, other members of the household turn to the rest of the livestock. Each type of animal presented its own unique winter challenges. Sheep required particular attention during the Edwardian winter. These aren't the ordinary woolly creatures you might imagine. This is Devon, where the local breeds like the Devon close wool had been carefully developed over centuries to thrive in the region's specific conditions. With their dense fleeces and hardy constitutions, they were better equipped than most to handle the cold. But even they needed help during the worst weather. The shepherd would be out checking on the flock multiple times daily, especially when snow covered the ground. Sheep have a dangerous habit of getting trapped in snowdrifts. Their wool gets wet and heavy, they grow exhausted trying to move, and without intervention, they simply die where they stand. Smart Edwardian farmers hung bells around the necks of a few sheep in each flock. When snow blanketed the fields, making the white sheep nearly invisible against the white landscape, the tinkling of bells helped locate the animals. Sometimes, though, only the tops of the bells would be visible above the snow, an eerie sight that meant digging was urgently needed. Pregnant ewes received extra attention. Many would lamb in late winter, and a lambing pen would be prepared in the barn with extra straw for warmth. Watching over birthing sheep meant many sleepless nights for Edwardian farmers, often in freezing conditions with only a lantern for light and warmth. You think you're tired from staying up late binge-watching Netflix? Imagine sitting on a wooden stool in an unheated barn at 3 a.m, watching over a struggling ewe, knowing that your livelihood literally depends on whether she and her lamb survive the night. The pigs had their own winter quarters, usually a stone-built sty with plenty of straw. Pigs are actually quite clever about staying warm. They'll burrow deep into bedding, creating nests and sleep piled together for warmth. An Edwardian farmer knew to provide extra feed during the coldest weather, as pigs burn more calories keeping warm. Most farms kept at least 1 or 2 pigs as essential sources of meat. They were living pantries, converting kitchen scraps and farm waste into valuable protein. A pig slaughtered in early winter would provide meat for months through careful preservation techniques. Let's talk about those preservation methods for a moment, because they were absolutely crucial to winter survival. Without refrigeration, Edwardians relied on ancient techniques to keep meat from spoiling. Salting was the primary method. Immediately after slaughter, the meat would be butchered and packed in layers of salt in wooden barrels or stone crocks. The salt drew moisture out of the meat, creating an environment hostile to bacteria. Pork treated this way became what we know as salt pork or bacon, depending on the cut and curing method. Smoking was another preservation technique, often used in combination with salting. The farm might have a small smokehouse, essentially a shed with a smoky fire kept smouldering below hanging pieces of meat. The smoke particles would settle on the meat, adding flavour while also acting as a preservative and deterrent to insects. For particularly cold winter days, the smokehouse offered an unexpected benefit. It was one of the warmest spots on the farm. The fire had to be tended regularly, and this task might be assigned to an older child or grandparent who could benefit from the relative warmth while being useful. While some workers focus on the animals, others turn to maintaining the farm's infrastructure. Winter was the time for repairs, fixing tools, mending harnesses, patching buildings. All the jobs that couldn't be done during the busy growing season were tackled now. The wagon shed becomes a workshop. Wheels need greasing, wooden parts checked for rot, metal fittings for rust. Edwardian tools were built to last, but they required constant maintenance. A neglected plough could mean disaster when spring planting time arrived. Inside these makeshift workshops, you'd find men working with wood, leather, and metal. They weren't specialists. Edwardian farmers had to be jacks of all trades. The same hands that guided a plough or milked a cow might be carving a replacement handle for a broken tool or carefully stitching a torn horse harness. And they did it all without electric lights or power tools. Work was done by daylight when possible, supplemented by lanterns or candles when necessary. Hand drills, planes, chisels and saws were used with remarkable skill passed down through generations. Winter was also the time for hedge laying, a traditional skill that transformed overgrown hedgerows into living fences. Using a billhook, a curved cutting tool with a hooked end, the hedger would partially cut through the stems of hawthorn, blackthorn, and other woody plants, then bend them over at an angle. The stems would heal in this position, creating a dense, stock-proof barrier that was both functional and beautiful. This was dangerous, exhausting work. The billhook was razor-sharp, the wood often frozen and unpredictable, the weather miserable, but properly maintained hedges were essential. They kept livestock contained, marked property boundaries, and provided shelter from wind and snow for both animals and crops. Speaking of crops, there weren't many growing in an Edwardian winter, but the vegetable garden wasn't completely dormant. Kale, Brussels sprouts, and certain root vegetables could survive in the ground through winter to be harvested as needed. These winter vegetables were incredibly precious as sources of fresh nutrition when most other foods were preserved. To protect more delicate winter crops, Edwardian gardeners used various techniques. Cold frames, essentially mini greenhouses made with old windows or glass panels, created microclimates where greens might survive. In severe frost, these would be covered with old sacks, straw mats, or whatever insulation was available. For root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips that remained in the ground, a thick layer of straw mulch prevented the soil from freezing solid. When a family needed vegetables for dinner, someone would brave the elements, pull back the mulch, and dig what was needed. Indoor food preparation continues throughout the day. The warm kitchen is the domain of the women and girls of the household, though gender roles were somewhat more fluid on small family farms where everyone pitched in where needed. A large pot of soup or stew simmers on the range, using the preserved foods from the pantry and root cellar. The smell fills the house. Onions, carrots, turnips, and perhaps a small piece of salt pork for flavour. Herbs dried from summer, thyme, sage, bay leaves add depth to what might otherwise be a monotonous winter diet. Bread baking is another crucial task. The dough rises slowly in the winter kitchen, perhaps nestled near the range for extra warmth. Kneading by hand takes strength and skill, especially when the flour is the coarse, home-ground variety many rural families used. The reward is hot, crusty bread that provides substantial calories for hard-working bodies. By midday, everyone gathers for the main meal. Farm families didn't eat lightly at lunch and heavily at dinner like we might today. The heaviest meal came in the middle of the day, providing energy for the afternoon's work. This might be the soup or stew that's been simmering all morning, served with fresh bread. After the brief respite of the midday meal, work resumes. The short winter afternoon means racing against the setting sun to complete essential tasks. Remember, there's no flipping a switch for instant light and heat. Every task requiring good visibility needs to be finished before the early dusk. For the farmer, this might mean checking fields and drainage ditches. Winter rain and snow could easily flood valuable cropland if drainage wasn't maintained. Armed with a spade and perhaps the help of a son or farm labourer, he clears blocked ditches and creates channels for water to flow away from fields. You know what's weird? Historians found diaries from Edwardian farmers showing they actually preferred working in freezing conditions over the mud that came with thaws. Frozen ground was hard but navigable. The mud that came with slightly warmer temperatures was absolutely treacherous. Sucking at boots, making every step an exhausting ordeal, turning simple tasks into grueling tests of endurance. While the men battle the elements outside, the farmhouse remains a hive of activity. Winter was the time for textile work, spinning wool into yarn, weaving, knitting, and sewing. These weren't just hobbies, they were essential skills that provided the family with clothing, blankets, and other necessities. In the Edwardian farmhouse, you might find a mother teaching her daughter to knit thick wool socks, an absolute essential when leather boots were the only footwear available. The clicking of knitting needles provides a rhythmic counterpoint to the howling wind outside. And the wool itself might have come from the farm's own sheep, processed by hand through washing, carding, and spinning. Even mending takes on critical importance in winter. A torn jacket or hole in a sock isn't just inconvenient, it could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. So darning, patching, and reinforcing are done with careful attention. Nothing is thrown away. Clothing is passed down, repurposed, and patched until practically nothing of the original garment remains. As afternoon progresses, attention turns to preparing for evening and night. More firewood or coal must be brought in and stacked near the range. Oil lamps need filling, wicks, trimming. Candles, often made on the farm from tallow, animal fat, are readied. The transition from daylight to artificial light was significant. Activities requiring good vision, fine sewing, reading, detailed work were generally done during daylight hours. Evening tasks were chosen for their simplicity, things that could be done by touch and feel or in dim lamplight. With sunset approaching, it's time for the evening livestock check. Animals need fresh water, breaking ice again if necessary, more feed, and a thorough inspection for any signs of trouble. Cows need their second milking of the day. Chickens are counted and secured in their coop to protect them from foxes and other predators. Winter evenings came early and stretched long. By 4 or 5 p.m. in December and January, full darkness had fallen, but bedtime might not come until 9 or 10. These evening hours were filled with indoor tasks, illuminated by the warm glow of firelight, oil lamps, and candles. The limited light created pools of illumination surrounded by deep shadow. Family members would gather close to the light sources, their faces half lit, giving the scene an almost theatrical quality. The range fire might be damped down slightly to conserve fuel while still providing heat, casting flickering light across the kitchen. For children, this was often the time for lessons. The Edwardian period saw significant increases in rural literacy, with most farm children attending local schools. In the evening, they might practice reading aloud by lamplight or work on sums using slate and chalk. Adults used these hours for light handwork. Women might knit or mend by feel as much as by sight, their fingers knowing the motions so well they barely needed to look. Men might work on small wood-carving projects, whittle tool handles, or repair small items. Conversation flowed more freely in these evening hours than during the busy daylight. Family news was shared, plans made for the coming days, stories told and retold. In an age before radio or television, people entertained themselves and each other. Weather was always a central topic of conversation. Predicting tomorrow's conditions wasn't just casual small talk, it was crucial intelligence that would determine what work could be done, what precautions needed to be taken. Edwardian farmers were keen observers of natural signs, cloud patterns, animal behaviours, the feel of the air that might indicate changing weather. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in morning, shepherd's warning. This old rhyme about sunset and sunrise colours predicting weather actually has meteorological validity, and Edwardian farmers lived by such traditional knowledge. They supplemented these observations with barometers, glass instruments that measured air pressure and helped predict storms. A family barometer would be checked religiously, its readings discussed and interpreted based on generations of experience. As evening wears on, preparations begin for the next day. Bread dough might be mixed and set to rise slowly overnight. Clothes are laid out near the fire to warm for morning. Children are sent to perform final checks, making sure outside doors are securely latched, windows tightly closed, precious livestock locked safely in their shelters. The evening milking has produced more fresh milk. Some is set aside for breakfast. Some might be processed immediately, perhaps churned into butter in a small hand-cranked churn. In winter, butter making was actually easier than in summer, as the cool temperatures helped the fat separate and solidify properly. Fresh butter, pale yellow in winter when cows ate hay rather than green grass, would be shaped into blocks using wooden moulds carved with decorative patterns. These might be stored in a cool pantry or even outdoors in a protected spot if the weather was cold enough. Water for morning is brought in and placed near the range. This saved precious time during the rushed dawn hours and prevented having to break ice from the pump or well first thing. An Edwardian family thought constantly about such efficiencies, each small task positioned within a larger system of survival. By now, exhaustion is setting in. The physical labour of an Edwardian winter day, hauling water, chopping wood, tending animals, making repairs, cooking, cleaning, demanded tremendous energy. Modern studies suggest that a typical farm worker in this era burned 4,000, 5,000 calories daily. That's equivalent to running a marathon every single day. Farm families didn't live in isolation, though. Even in winter, community connections were maintained. A neighbour might stop by with news, perhaps staying for a cup of tea before braving the cold journey home. These visits weren't just social, they were a crucial safety net, a way of checking that everyone in the scattered community was surviving. If someone hadn't been seen for a few days during particularly bad weather, neighbours would make a point of stopping by. In an era before telephones, this physical checking in was the only way to ensure everyone was safe. Many an elderly person or struggling family was saved by this informal monitoring system. Churches served as community hubs even in the depths of winter. Sunday services were rarely cancelled, no matter the weather. Families would bundle up in their warmest clothes and make their way to the village church, sometimes walking miles through snow. The church itself was rarely heated beyond a small coal stove, but the communal gathering provided both spiritual and social warmth. As darkness deepens outside, the Edwardian farm family begins preparing for bed. The fire is banked, carefully covered with ashes to keep it smouldering through the night without consuming too much fuel. This was a skilled task. Too much damping down and the fire might go out completely. Too little and precious fuel would be wasted. Oil lamps are extinguished one by one as family members retire, leaving perhaps a single candle to light the way upstairs. The darkness deepens, broken only by the faint red glow from the banked fire and perhaps moonlight streaming through frosty windows. The last person up, usually the farmer himself, makes a final check of the house. Doors secure, fire safe, water brought in for morning. These simple checks were part of a routine as old as farming itself, a routine that kept the household safe through another winter night. Finally, it's time to face the cold bedroom again. No one lingered over undressing in an unheated Edwardian bedroom. Nightclothes, often long flannel nightgowns or shirts, might have been warming by the kitchen fire and would be quickly changed into. Bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, or simply hot water bottles might have been placed between the sheets earlier to take the worst chill off. Then it's under the heavy blankets, perhaps with a family member or two nearby for shared warmth. In many farmhouses, children slept together not just to save space but for literal survival, their combined body heat making the difference between comfort and dangerous cold. The house creaks and settles in the frigid night air. Outside, perhaps snow is falling, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and treacherous. Inside, wrapped in layers of wool and exhaustion, the Edwardian farm family sleeps, gathering strength for tomorrow's identical battle against winter, cold, and hunger. Their sleep wasn't the uninterrupted 8 hours we consider ideal today. Most would wake in the night when the temperature dropped furthest, usually around 3 a.m. They might add more covers, huddle closer together, or simply endure until dawn brought the promise of the fire being rebuilt and life beginning again. While the outdoor work of an Edwardian farm demanded tremendous physical endurance, the indoor world of the farmhouse had its own rhythms, challenges, and ingenuity. As afternoon settles in and workers return from the fields and barns, the farmhouse becomes the centre of winter life. Let's step inside a typical Devonshire farmhouse of the period, not the grand country estates of the wealthy, but the practical working farmhouses where most rural Edwardians actually lived. These weren't the quaint, picture-perfect cottages of modern imagination. They were sturdy, practical buildings designed for function over beauty. The first thing that strikes you is the layout. Unlike our open-concept modern homes, Edwardian farmhouses were compartmentalised into distinct spaces, each with specific purposes. This wasn't just tradition, it was a brilliant strategy for winter survival. Smaller rooms were easier to heat than large open spaces. Doors could be closed to create pockets of warmth where they were most needed. The heart of the home was undoubtedly the kitchen. Often the largest room in the house, it served as cooking space, dining area, workroom, and social centre. The massive range dominated one wall. Black iron, constantly hungry for coal or wood, but giving back steady heat and cooking capacity in return. Heat distribution throughout the house was uneven, to put it mildly. The kitchen might be almost uncomfortably warm near the range, while just a few feet away the temperature dropped noticeably. Corners furthest from the heat source could be downright frigid, and upstairs bedrooms, those were essentially cold storage except for the brief period when occupants were actually sleeping in them. This temperature variation dictated how spaces were used. In the coldest weather, family life contracted to the warmest rooms. Beds might even be brought downstairs for the elderly or very young. The scullery, pantry, and formal parlour, if the house had one, were left unheated unless absolutely necessary. Look up and you might notice that the ceilings are surprisingly low by modern standards. This wasn't poor design, it was intentional. Lower ceilings meant less space to heat and better heat retention. Some farmhouses even had false ceilings installed in the most commonly used rooms, creating an insulating air pocket between floors. Windows were another consideration. Glass was expensive and single-paned, offering minimal insulation. During severe cold snaps, families might paste strips of paper over cracks around window frames or stuff rags into gaps to prevent drafts. Heavy curtains were drawn not just at night but all day in unused rooms to create another barrier against heat loss. The floors beneath your feet would likely be stone in the kitchen and scullery, perhaps wood in other downstairs rooms. Upstairs would be wooden floorboards, often with significant gaps between them. Rugs and carpets weren't just decorative, they were essential insulation. Many farm families made their own rag rugs from scraps of worn-out clothing, creating surprisingly beautiful and practical floor coverings. The furniture reflects the priorities of the era, solid, functional pieces built to last generations. Wooden chairs and benches could be pulled close to the fire as needed. Tables were work surfaces as much as dining spots. Storage was built into every possible space. Cupboards, dressers, and chests held the family's possessions and winter provisions. Near the range, you'd find an array of specialised cooking implements, cast iron pots and pans, earthenware crocks, copper kettles. Each had specific purposes. These weren't matching sets bought all at once, but collections built over years, often inherited from previous generations. A well-used cast iron pot might have served the family for decades, becoming perfectly seasoned and non-stick long before Teflon was invented. Food storage was a constant concern. The pantry, a cool room specifically for storing provisions, would be stocked with preserved goods. Shelves lined with glass jars of pickled vegetables, preserved fruits and jams, crocks of salted meat or pickled eggs, bags of flour, sugar and dried beans, root vegetables in wooden boxes filled with sand to prevent sprouting and rotting. Some larger farms had dedicated cheese rooms where wheels of farm-made cheese aged slowly through the winter. Cheese was particularly valuable during winter months, high in calories, protein, and fat. It kept well without refrigeration and provided essential nutrition when fresh foods were scarce. Water was another challenge. While some fortunate farms had pumps in the kitchen, many rural homes still relied on outdoor wells or springs. This meant multiple daily trips outdoors carrying heavy buckets, a particularly miserable task in freezing weather. Water was used and reused with careful planning. Washing water might later be used to scrub floors. The final rinse might water houseplants or be added to animal feed. The water situation influenced everything from cooking to personal hygiene. Full baths were rare in winter, perhaps once a week at most. Instead, people would take bird baths, washing essential areas with small amounts of water heated on the range. Even wealthy farm owners might go months without immersing themselves completely in water during the coldest periods. Laundry, too, had to adapt to winter conditions. Washing clothes was incredibly labour-intensive without modern machines. Water had to be hauled and heated in large copper tubs. Clothes were scrubbed by hand on washboards, wrung out, rinsed, wrung again, and then somehow dried in the damp winter air. In summer, laundry would be hung outdoors, but winter forced different solutions. Some items might be draped over racks near the kitchen range. Others might be hung in attic spaces where they would freeze dry, literally freezing solid and then gradually drying as moisture sublimated directly from ice to vapour. This method actually worked surprisingly well for certain items, though it could take days. For a farming family, the Edwardian class system still penetrated daily life, though perhaps less rigidly than in urban settings. A prosperous farm might employ several workers, farm labourers for the fields, perhaps a dairymaid, and possibly a girl to help with household tasks. These weren't servants in the formal sense of grand country houses, but workers who were nevertheless lower on the social ladder than the farm owner and his family. Winter changed these dynamics somewhat. With less field work to be done, labourers might be laid off until spring, especially on smaller farms. Only the most essential workers were kept on, those needed for livestock care and critical maintenance. This created a precarious situation for agricultural workers, who might struggle to support their families through winter months with little or no income. For those workers who did stay employed through winter, living arrangements varied. Some lived in the farmhouse itself, perhaps in attic rooms or lean-to additions. Others might occupy cottages on the farm property. A few would walk or cycle from nearby villages regardless of weather. The family that owned the farm, typically a farmer, his wife, their children, and perhaps elderly parents, occupied the main spaces of the house. The generational knowledge passed down through these families was a key element of winter survival. Grandmother might not be able to haul water anymore, but she knew exactly how to preserve meat or predict weather from aching joints and cloud patterns. Children had their own roles in the winter household. From a surprisingly young age, as little as 5 or 6, they would be assigned chores appropriate to their abilities. A young child might be responsible for keeping the kindling box filled or feeding chickens. Older children took on more complex tasks like churning butter, helping with cooking, or assisting with livestock. Childhood in Edwardian rural England wasn't the protected, play-centred experience we imagine today. Children were expected to contribute to the family's survival from the moment they were capable. Education happened around these responsibilities, attending the village school when possible, but often missing days when farm work demanded all hands. Winter evenings were when most formal learning happened. By lamplight, parents would help children practice reading, writing, and arithmetic. Books were precious possessions, carefully preserved and read repeatedly. A family Bible might be the only book in simpler homes, serving for both religious instruction and reading practice. The Edwardian period saw increasing literacy rates even in rural areas, with the Education Act of 1902 establishing more consistent schooling. Still, farm children's education was often interrupted and practically focused. They learned what they needed to survive and continue the family business, with additional skills considered luxuries. Speaking of luxuries, let's talk about winter foods. The Edwardian farmhouse kitchen produced meals that were hearty, practical, and designed to sustain workers through cold days of physical labor. While the wealthy might enjoy exotic imported foods even in winter, rural diets were largely determined by what could be produced and preserved locally. Breakfast might be porridge made from locally grown oats, perhaps served with milk from the farm's cows and sweetened with a bit of precious sugar or honey. Homemade bread with butter or dripping congealed fat saved from cooking meat provided additional calories. The midday meal served when workers came in from morning tasks was typically the largest of the day. A thick soup or stew would be the centerpiece, perhaps containing root vegetables, dried beans, and small amounts of preserved meat for flavor. The enormous cast-iron pot would have been simmering on the range all morning, developing deep flavors from simple ingredients. Evening meals were lighter, perhaps bread and cheese or leftover soup from midday. This pattern reflected both practical concerns. The major cooking was done while daylight made kitchen work easier, and digestive wisdom. Heavy meals before bed were correctly understood to disturb sleep. Tea was consumed throughout the day, strong, hot, and sweet when sugar was available. It provided warmth, caffeine for energy, and a psychological boost during the darkest days. The kettle was kept ready on the hob, able to produce a fresh pot quickly when needed. Food preservation techniques had been refined over generations to create maximum nutrition and flavor from limited resources. Nothing edible was wasted. Stale bread became pudding, meat scraps flavored soups, fruit too, bruised for eating, was preserved as jam. The fat trimmed from meat was rendered into lard for cooking or tallow for candle making. These preservation methods weren't just practically necessary, they created the distinctive flavors of Edwardian farm cooking, the smokiness of bacon cured in the farm's own smokehouse, the tang of home-pickled onions, the deep umami of well-aged cheese. These weren't second-best alternatives to fresh foods, but culinary traditions with their own integrity and appeal. Special occasions called for special foods. Even in winter, Christmas might see a goose or turkey on the table, or perhaps a beef roast for more prosperous farms. Preserved summer fruits would be transformed into pies and puddings. These celebrations were carefully planned for, with ingredients set aside during more abundant times. The women of the household were typically responsible for food preparation, though men might be involved in specific tasks like butchering or brewing. This division wasn't absolute on working farms where practicality often trumped convention, but the kitchen was largely considered the woman's domain. Health concerns were always present during winter months. Without modern medicine, even minor illnesses could become serious. The damp cold of a Devonshire winter brought respiratory infections, chilblains from poor circulation, and various aches and pains. The farmhouse medicine cabinet would contain a mix of commercial remedies and traditional preparations. Bottles of patented medicines shared space with herbs grown and dried from the garden, camphorated oil for chest congestion, witch hazel for bruises, peppermint for digestive troubles. These remedies had varying efficacy, but they represented the best options available. Serious illness presented difficult decisions. Doctors were expensive and often far away. A farm family might be reluctant to call for medical help except in dire emergencies. Instead, they relied on community knowledge, with experienced local women often serving as de facto healthcare providers for everything from childbirth to setting broken bones. Winter was particularly dangerous for the elderly and very young. Hypothermia, pneumonia, and influenza claimed many lives each year. Edwardian farm families were intimately familiar with mortality in a way modern people rarely are. Death was not hidden away in hospitals, but experienced directly in the home. This reality influenced winter habits. The elderly were given the warmest sleeping spots. Children were kept active to maintain circulation. Everyone watched everyone else for signs of illness. This vigilance was crucial in an era before antibiotics and modern medical interventions. Despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, Edwardian farm homes fostered remarkable resilience and ingenuity. Every problem had multiple potential solutions, often involving creative repurposing of available materials. Cold feet? Newspapers could be crumpled and stuffed into boots for insulation. A flat iron heated on the range, wrapped in flannel, and placed at the foot of the bed would provide hours of warmth. Hot bricks served the same purpose. Some families even heated bags of dried peas or beans, which retained heat surprisingly well. Darkness came early in winter, and lighting was both expensive and dangerous. Candles and oil lamps were used sparingly, and activities were planned around available light. Work requiring good vision was done near windows during daylight hours. Evening tasks could be performed by touch or in dim light. Knitting, for example, could be done largely by feel once the basic pattern was established. The rhythm of winter days was largely dictated by light and temperature. Rising at dawn, the family would immediately revive the banked fire from overnight. As the house slowly warmed, breakfast would be prepared and eaten. Morning chores, both indoors and out, would be completed while daylight allowed. Midday saw the main meal and perhaps a brief rest, especially for older family members. Afternoon work continued until dusk, which came distressingly early in December and January. Evening activities were chosen for their practicality under artificial light. Mending, food preparation for the next day, perhaps some reading aloud or music if the family was so inclined. Bedtime came earlier in winter than summer, though not as early as we might expect. 9 or 10 o'clock was typical, with everyone retiring to cold bedrooms, warmed only by whatever heat sources could be safely left through the night. Hot water bottles, heated stones wrapped in cloth, or perhaps the luxury of a bedroom fireplace in more prosperous homes. Sleep itself was different in the Edwardian era. Rather than the solid 8 hours we consider ideal today, many people practiced segmented sleep, sleeping for several hours, waking for an hour or so in the middle of the night, then returning to sleep until dawn. This wakeful period might be used for quiet contemplation, intimacy between couples, or small tasks that could be done in darkness or by firelight. This sleep pattern aligned with the extreme length of winter nights in northern latitudes. In Devon in December, darkness might last 16 hours or more. No society, no matter how dedicated to productivity, could sleep that entire time. Instead, Edwardians adapted with these periods of nighttime wakefulness that were considered completely normal. The long winter evenings also provided rare opportunities for family bonding. With outdoor work limited by darkness, household members gathered around the warmth of the kitchen range. This was when stories were told, skills taught, plans made. Children learned family history, practical knowledge, and moral lessons during these fireside conversations. Music was another common evening pastime. Even modest farm homes might have a piano, harmonium, or simpler instruments like harmonicas or penny whistles. Family singing was widespread, with traditional songs passed down through generations. These weren't professional performances, but participatory events where everyone contributed. Reading aloud was popular in literate households. The Edwardian period saw increasing availability of books and periodicals, though these remained relatively expensive. A single newspaper or magazine might be read by the entire family, discussed at length, and then repurposed for everything from fire starting to pattern making to personal hygiene. Games provided entertainment without requiring significant light or space. Card games, dominoes, and simple board games occupied winter evenings. Chess and checkers were popular among those who had learned the rules. Children played with homemade toys, dolls stuffed with straw, wooden animals carved by fathers or grandfathers, balls made from rags wound tightly and stitched. Winter was also when repairs and improvements to clothing and household items took place. Mending was constant, socks darned, shirts patched, blankets repaired. But beyond mere maintenance, winter evenings allowed for creation. Women might knit new garments, embroider pillowcases, or piece together quilts from fabric scraps. Men might carve tools' handles, repair harnesses, or fashion small wooden items. These weren't just practical activities, but expressions of creativity and identity. A hand-embroidered tablecloth or intricately carved butter mold represented both utility and artistry. Farm families took pride in these creations, which often became treasured possessions passed down through generations. The social world contracted during winter, but it didn't disappear entirely. Neighbours remained important, especially in emergencies. If a farmer fell ill, neighbours would step in to care for his livestock. If a roof collapsed under heavy snow, the community would gather to repair it. This mutual aid wasn't just kindness, but a recognition of shared vulnerability. Next time, it might be your farm needing help. Churches remained central to rural communities, with services continuing regardless of weather. Families would bundle up and walk miles through snow to attend Sunday worship. Beyond religious significance, church provided critical social connections during isolated winter months. News was shared, marriages planned, business conducted on the church steps after services. Other community gatherings adapted to winter conditions. Markets moved indoors where possible. Travelling peddlers still made their rounds, bringing news along with goods for sale. Occasional dances or socials might be held in the village hall, providing rare opportunities for young people to meet potential spouses from beyond their immediate circle. Mail became especially important during winter isolation. Letters from distant family members were read repeatedly and shared with the household. Catalogues from city shops were pored over, with occasional precious orders placed for items unavailable locally. Parcels that arrived might contain not just purchased goods, but gifts or shared resources from family elsewhere. Winter brought its own beauty alongside hardship. Frost patterns on windows resembled intricate lace. Snow transformed familiar landscapes into something magical. The quality of light, especially reflected off snow, created brief moments of extraordinary beauty. Farm families, attuned to natural cycles and changes, noticed and appreciated these aspects even while battling the practical challenges winter presented. As afternoon fades toward evening, the farmhouse prepares for another night. Lamps are filled with precious oil, their glass chimneys cleaned for maximum light. The fire is built up to last through dinner preparations. Outside, the last livestock checks are made before darkness makes such tasks difficult and dangerous. The short winter days created a particular kind of closeness in Edwardian farm families. Gathered in the limited warm spaces, working together for survival, they developed interdependence that's difficult for modern people to imagine. Winter wasn't just endured, but actively managed through collective effort and accumulated wisdom. As the sun drops toward the horizon, the farm day shifts toward evening routines. The transition from daylight to lamplight, from outdoor to indoor focus, marks another small victory in the long campaign against winter's challenges. One more day navigated successfully, one day closer to spring's distant promise. As evening settles over the Edwardian farm, the rhythm of life shifts again. The last light fades from the sky, transforming windows into black mirrors that reflect the golden glow of lamps and firelight inside. Now comes what many consider the most peaceful time of the winter day. When work slows, when families gather, when the bitter cold outside makes the modest warmth within feel all the more precious. The transition from day to evening follows a gentle, predictable pattern. First, the outdoor workers return, stamping snow from boots, unwrapping scarves stiff with frost, hands red and aching from hours in the cold. The heavy outdoor clothing is hung carefully near the kitchen range to dry for tomorrow. Boots are placed upside down on pegs or racks designed specifically for this purpose, allowing the insides to dry completely overnight. This moment, the return to the relative warmth and shelter of the farmhouse, carries both physical and emotional significance. The dangers of winter darkness are temporarily held at bay. The family is complete again, everyone accounted for and safe. There's a collective exhalation, a subtle relaxation of vigilance that's been maintained all day. Evening meals in Edwardian farm homes were typically simple affairs, especially compared to the hearty midday dinner. The kitchen range has been maintained throughout the afternoon, so the house is now at its warmest, a perfect time for gathering around the table. A typical winter evening meal might consist of bread and cheese, perhaps with pickled vegetables or the remains of midday soup reheated. Maybe there's cold meat from Sunday's roast, carefully portioned to last through several days. Tea is brewed fresh, strong, sweet, and warming. The dining table in a working farmhouse was rarely the formal setup we might imagine from period dramas. Instead, it was a practical, sturdy piece of furniture that served many purposes throughout the day: work surface, desk, ironing board, and finally, dining table. Meals were served family style, with dishes placed in the centre for everyone to help themselves. Tableware reflected the practical nature of farm life. Heavy ceramic plates and bowls designed to retain heat, steel cutlery with wooden or bone handles, mugs and cups of varying sizes and origins, perhaps some handed down through generations, others acquired from markets or as gifts. Unlike wealthy households with matching sets, farm tableware told a story of accumulation over time. Edwardian farm families didn't stand on ceremony for everyday meals, but they did observe certain social customs. The father typically sat at the head of the table, serving meat if there was any. Grace might be said before eating, regardless of how simple the meal. Children were expected to wait until adults were served before beginning, and to remain at the table until everyone had finished. Conversation during the evening meal had its own character, less hurried than breakfast, less focused on work than the midday dinner. This was when family news might be shared, when children might speak of their school day, when plans for tomorrow could be discussed in a relaxed manner. The quality of light, softer, warmer from lamps and candles rather than daylight, seemed to encourage this more reflective communication. After the meal, the kitchen would be put in order. Dishes were washed in water, heated on the range, dried and returned to their places. Leftovers were carefully stored. Crumbs might be collected for chickens or to add to future bread dough. Nothing was wasted. This cleanup was often a shared task, with children helping according to their ages and abilities. With dinner concluded and the kitchen tidy, the evening's activities could begin. These varied widely depending on the family's circumstances, preferences, and the particular demands of the season, but certain patterns were common across rural Edwardian households. Preparing for the next day was a priority. Bread dough might be mixed and set to rise slowly overnight, ready for early morning baking. Clothes would be laid out for morning, perhaps warmed by the fire before being taken to cold bedrooms. Any special tasks for tomorrow, perhaps a trip to market or a planned butchering, would require specific preparations. Once these practical concerns were addressed, the family could turn to maintenance tasks that were well suited to evening lamplight. This is when mending happened, darning socks, patching clothing, repairing harnesses or tools. The golden circle of light from an oil lamp created a natural workspace, with family members gathering close to share the illumination. The lamp itself required regular attention. The glass chimney needed cleaning to remove soot that would dim the light. The wick had to be trimmed to prevent smoking. The oil reservoir required refilling. These small maintenance tasks were often assigned to older children, teaching them responsibility while contributing to the household. Fire management remained constant through the evening. The range needed regular feeding with coal or wood to maintain heat. In homes fortunate enough to have additional fireplaces in other rooms, these might be lit for evening gatherings, creating islands of warmth in the otherwise cool house. As the evening progressed, work might give way to education and entertainment. This was the time when children's lessons were reviewed, when letters might be written, when books, if the household possessed them, would be read aloud. Literacy rates were rising during the Edwardian period, but reading material remained precious. A single book might be read repeatedly over many winters, its stories becoming part of family tradition. For families without books, oral storytelling filled the gap. Parents and grandparents shared tales from their own childhoods, local legends or stories passed down through generations. These weren't just entertainment, but vehicles for transmitting values, knowledge and cultural identity. Many combined practical information with engaging narratives, teaching weather prediction through tales of dramatic storms or animal husbandry through stories of exceptional farm animals from the past. Music provided another form of evening entertainment. The piano was becoming more common in prosperous farm homes, while simpler instruments, fiddles, accordions, tin whistles, were widespread across economic levels. Group singing required no equipment at all, just the accumulated repertoire of folk songs, hymns, and popular tunes that everyone knew. Children's games adapted to evening conditions. String figures, shadow puppets, and simple card games could all be enjoyed in limited light. Older children might practice whittling or other handcrafts under supervision. Very young ones might play with rag dolls or wooden toys on the warm hearth. Conversation took on a different quality in these evening hours. Freed from the immediate pressures of daylight work, discussions could range more widely. Plans for spring planting, reminiscences of past winters, gentle gossip about neighbours and relatives, local politics and national news if newspapers made their way to the farm. These conversations strengthened family bonds while passing time during the long, dark hours. Weather remained a constant topic, taking on almost spiritual significance during winter. The evening ritual often included checking for signs of tomorrow's conditions. Was the sky clear, promising severe cold? Were clouds gathering, suggesting snow? Did joints ache, indicating changing pressure? These observations weren't idle curiosity, but critical intelligence that would determine tomorrow's work and safety. Some families kept written weather records noting temperatures, precipitation, and conditions each day. These journals, passed down through generations, created valuable climate records while helping predict patterns. Weather like this came last February too and broke after 3 days. A grandfather might say, consulting memory strengthened by such records. As evening deepened toward night, preparations for sleep would begin. This transition was marked by specific rituals designed to secure both physical and psychological comfort through the dangerous hours of darkness and extreme cold. The fire would be carefully banked, covered with ashes to slow combustion while maintaining enough heat to be easily revived in the morning. This was a skilled task requiring precise judgment. Too little damping and precious fuel would burn away overnight. Too much and the fire might go out completely, leaving the house dangerously cold by dawn. Outside doors would be checked and secured. Livestock would receive a final inspection. Water would be brought inside so it wouldn't freeze overnight, with enough stored for morning needs before the pump or well could be accessed. Chamber pots would be placed in bedrooms, as the outhouse was a forbidding destination during freezing nights. These practical vessels, often kept under beds, eliminated the need for dangerous nighttime journeys outside or to unheated parts of the house. Washing before bed was minimal by modern standards, perhaps just hands and face in water warmed by the fire. Full baths were weekly events at most, typically scheduled for Saturdays in preparation for Sunday church attendance. Bedtime clothing was designed for warmth rather than appearance. Long flannel nightgowns or shirts covered the body from neck to ankle. Nightcaps, actual caps worn while sleeping, not the alcoholic drinks, kept heads warm. Some people even wore socks to bed, particularly the elderly or those with poor circulation. Beds themselves required preparation. In unheated bedrooms, sheets and blankets would be painfully cold. Various warming methods were employed: hot water bottles, heated bricks wrapped in flannel, warming pans filled with embers and run between the sheets before entry. These provided initial comfort that had to last until body heat gradually warmed the enclosed space under heavy covers. Bedrooms in Edwardian farmhouses rarely had fireplaces of their own. Heating was considered unnecessary for spaces used primarily for unconscious hours, and there were safety concerns about unattended fires. Instead, the architectural design often clustered bedrooms around the kitchen chimney, allowing some residual warmth to penetrate these spaces. The actual moment of going to bed followed careful staging. Lamps would be extinguished one by one as family members retired, with perhaps a single candle lighting the way upstairs. Undressing in a cold bedroom was done with remarkable speed. Modern researchers have timed historical reenactors and found they could change from day clothes to nightwear in under a minute when properly motivated by cold. Then came the dash into bed, pulling heavy covers up quickly to trap whatever warmth existed. The weight of winter bedding was substantial: multiple quilts, blankets, and perhaps a feather comforter for fortunate households. This weight provided both warmth and a sense of security, like being embraced by layers of protection against the hostile night. Family sleeping arrangements were practical rather than private. Children often shared beds for warmth, regardless of gender, until a certain age. In smaller homes, multiple beds might occupy a single room. The elderly might sleep downstairs near the kitchen range if stairs became difficult to navigate. These arrangements weren't just about space limitations, but survival strategy. Shared body heat made a significant difference in comfort and safety. Sleep itself followed different patterns than we experience today. Without electric lighting artificially extending days, Edwardian rural families were more aligned with natural light cycles. Winter brought longer sleep periods, sometimes up to 10 hours, though these might be broken into segments. The phenomenon of first sleep and second sleep was still common in rural areas. People would sleep for several hours after dark, then wake naturally around midnight. This wakeful period might last an hour or more before second sleep commenced until dawn. far from being considered insomnia. This pattern was normal and utilized productively for quiet contemplation, marital intimacy, checking on fires or livestock, or simply listening to the winter night. During this midnight waking, the house would be nearly silent and absolutely dark except for the faint glow of banked fires. The sounds would be minimal, the tick of a clock if the family owned one, the creak of the structure responding to cold, perhaps the distant howl of wind or fox. This peaceful interlude provided a different quality of consciousness than either daytime or full sleep. A liminal space for reflection impossible in our constantly illuminated modern world. The deepest cold came in the hours before dawn, when even banked fires burned low and the house's residual heat dissipated. This was when frost might form on the inside of bedroom windows, when water left in basins would freeze solid, when the extra blanket at the foot of the bed would be pulled up for additional warmth. This pre-dawn period was particularly dangerous for the vulnerable, the very young, the elderly, the ill. Families developed protective routines with someone, often the mother, rising in these darkest hours to check on children and older relatives, perhaps add fuel to fires, ensuring everyone remained safe through the night's coldest point. The awareness of vulnerability was constant. Winter night was not just uncomfortable but potentially deadly. Carbon monoxide from improperly maintained fires, hypothermia from inadequate heating, fire from unattended lamps or candles. These dangers shaped behaviours and created vigilance that modern people with our smoke detectors and central heating can hardly imagine. Yet within this challenging environment, Edwardian farm families found profound comfort. The contrast between hostile outdoor conditions and the relative warmth of the home created appreciation for simple pleasures. The shared experience of winter survival strengthened bonds between family members and neighbours. The predictable rhythms of evening rituals provided psychological security in uncertain times. As the night deepens, the farmhouse settles into near-complete stillness. Outside, perhaps moonlight reflects off snow, creating an ethereal landscape of silver and shadow. Inside, the family sleeps under layers of wool and cotton, their breath visible in cold bedrooms, their bodies instinctively curled for warmth. Dreams might be influenced by physical sensations, the weight of blankets becoming dream mountains to climb, the cold tip of a nose inspiring visions of Arctic exploration. The subconscious processes the day's events while the body conserves energy for tomorrow's work. Somewhere in the house, a clock might tick steadily, marking the progression through darkness toward dawn. Each completed day of winter was a small victory, one more successfully navigated milestone on the journey toward spring. The family sleeps, gathering strength for tomorrow's identical battle against cold, darkness, and scarcity. In farmhouses across Devonshire, across all of rural England, this scene repeats with variations determined by wealth, family size, and individual circumstance, but the fundamental experience of winter night transcended these differences, creating a shared cultural understanding that shaped the Edwardian rural character, resilient, practical, and intimately connected to natural cycles. Outside, perhaps snow continues to fall, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and treacherous. The farmhouse stands as a small island of human presence in the vast winter night, its sleeping inhabitants temporarily surrendered to darkness, but prepared to re-emerge with dawn, continuing the ancient patterns of rural winter survival. In the deepest heart of an Edwardian winter, when darkness seems eternal and cold penetrates to the bone, the real test of survival begins. January and February brought what rural Devonshire families called the hungry months, when preserved food stores began to dwindle, when fuel supplies ran low, when the promise of spring seemed impossibly distant. These were the days when the thermometer might not rise above freezing for weeks, when snow could pile in drifts taller than a man, when the very air seemed to crystallize with each breath. This was when survival depended not just on physical preparation, but on mental fortitude, community bonds, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. Let's step into this challenging world and see how Edwardian farm families endured the darkest days of winter. Dawn arrives late during these deep winter months, sometimes not until after 8 a.m. in northern parts of England. The family rises in darkness, their movements slow and deliberate in the frigid morning air. The first person up, often the mother or father, has the hardest task, leaving the relative warmth of bed to rekindle the banked fire. Kneeling before the range, working by touch as much as by sight, they carefully uncover the embers preserved overnight beneath their blanket of ash. With nearly frozen fingers, they add small pieces of kindling, gently blowing to encourage the faint glow into flame. This daily resurrection of fire connects them to ancestors stretching back to prehistoric times. The fundamental human act of creating warmth from darkness. As the fire catches and grows, the kitchen gradually becomes the one tolerable space in the otherwise freezing house. Family members emerge from bedrooms wrapped in blankets, gathering close to the range. The day begins with this huddling, this shared experience of discomfort, slowly transforming into bearable warmth. Breakfast is simple but essential. Hot porridge made with the farm's stored oats, perhaps with a small amount of precious sugar or preserved fruit for flavour. The steaming bowls warm hands before they warm bellies. Tea is brewed strong, providing caffeine to jumpstart cold-slowed bodies and minds. Outside, the farm lies transformed under winter's heaviest mantle. Perhaps fog hangs in the river valleys, or frost coats every surface with delicate crystals, or snow blankets the landscape in pristine white. This beauty carries danger. Each breathtaking winter scene represents another challenge to survival. The first outdoor task is creating paths through snow to outbuildings, animal shelters, the well or pump, the woodpile. This isn't just convenience but necessity. In deep snow, even familiar spaces become treacherous mazes. A clear path to the privy could be literally life-saving during illness or for the elderly. Access to animals meant they could be fed and watered. The path to the road connected the farm to potential help in emergencies. Snow shoveling was exhausting work, particularly in the drifts that formed on the windward sides of buildings or against hedgerows. Long-handled wooden shovels were used, their edges sometimes reinforced with metal strips. The technique was to lift smaller amounts rather than trying to move too much at once, a steady rhythm that conserved energy while making gradual progress. In the worst storms, families might run ropes between buildings, literal lifelines that could be followed when visibility dropped to near zero in blizzard conditions. A farmer caught outside during a sudden snowstorm might lose all sense of direction within yards of his own door. The ropes provided tactile guidance when landmarks disappeared in swirling white. Water management became critically important. Frozen pipes and pumps could leave the household without access to this most basic necessity. Various preventive measures were employed. Pumps might be wrapped with straw or old blankets. Indoor pipes were sometimes packed with sawdust for insulation. If freezing seemed inevitable, systems would be drained to prevent the destructive expansion of ice. When prevention failed and water sources froze anyway, alternatives had to be found. Snow could be melted, though this was inefficient and required significant fuel. Natural springs, if available, might continue flowing even in the coldest weather. In coastal areas, salt water could be used for cleaning purposes, saving precious fresh water for drinking and cooking. The livestock faced their own winter struggles. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and poultry all needed special attention during extreme cold. Their usual routines were modified to conserve their energy and your own. Water troughs needed constant checking and breaking of ice. Feeding schedules might be adjusted, providing more calories during the coldest periods and timing meals to maximize the animal's natural heat generation. Bedding was added generously to stalls and pens, creating insulating layers that trapped body heat. Special attention was paid to vulnerable animals, the pregnant, the very young, the elderly. A sheep about to lamb might be brought into a warmer space to protect the newborn from freezing. A cow close to calving received extra feed and the cleanest, most sheltered spot in the barn. Checking animals during severe weather meant multiple trips into the bitter cold. Each journey had to be carefully planned to accomplish maximum tasks with minimum exposure. Tools were gathered, feed prepared, water carried, all to limit time spent in dangerous conditions. Even with these precautions, winter brought inevitable losses. A chicken found frozen on its roost, a newborn lamb that couldn't be revived, a weakened elder cow that simply lay down one morning and wouldn't rise again. Edwardian farmers faced these deaths with stoicism, born of necessity. They mourned briefly, salvaged what they could, and focused on protecting the remaining animals. Inside the farmhouse, the battle against cold continued on multiple fronts. The physical structure itself creaked and shifted with freezing and thawing. Gaps appeared in doors and window frames as wood contracted in the dry, cold air. These were stuffed with rags or paper to prevent drafts. The limited number of heated rooms became even more restrictive during extreme cold. Family activities concentrated in the kitchen, with excursions to other parts of the house kept brief and purposeful. Chamber pots eliminated nighttime trips to the privy. Wash basins were filled in the evening so morning ablutions wouldn't require fetching water in the pre-dawn dark. Sleep patterns adapted to the season's demands. The family might retire earlier than usual, sharing body heat under layers of blankets and quilts. They might rise later when possible, avoiding the coldest pre-dawn hours during blizzards or extreme temperature drops. Normal schedules were abandoned in favor of conservation of heat, food, fuel, and human energy. Clothing choices became increasingly strategic. Multiple thin layers trapped air better than single thick ones. Wool remained the miracle fabric, warming even when damp, breathing to prevent overheating during exertion, naturally antibacterial for extended wear without washing. Hats, scarves, and gloves were never optional but essential equipment. Food strategies shifted during these deepest winter weeks. Meals became simpler but more frequent, providing steady energy rather than large spikes and drops. Hot liquids, tea, soups, broths appeared throughout the day, warming from the inside out. Foods with high fat content provided concentrated calories and a sense of satisfaction that helped combat winter depression. The psychological aspects of deep winter survival were as important as the physical ones. Edwardian farm families understood what modern science has confirmed, that mental outlook significantly impacts physical resilience. Various strategies helped maintain spirits during these challenging months. Light became precious beyond its practical utility. Even the weak winter sun was welcomed enthusiastically when it appeared. Curtains would be opened wide to admit every possible ray. Outdoor tasks would be rescheduled to take advantage of sunny periods. The family might pause momentarily in their work to turn faces toward the light, absorbing both warmth and psychological comfort. Artificial light was used judiciously but meaningfully. Oil lamps might burn a little longer on particularly dark evenings. Extra candles might be lit for special occasions. The firelight itself was maximized, banking the fire in ways that produced more flame and illumination when family gatherings occurred. The creation of beauty within harsh circumstances provided emotional sustenance. A branch of winter berries brought inside, ice crystals on a window admired for their intricate patterns, the golden glow of firelight on faces gathered around the hearth. These small aesthetic pleasures acknowledged that humans need more than mere survival. They need moments of wonder and appreciation. Celebrations took on heightened importance. Traditional winter holidays, Christmas, New Year, Candlemas, were observed with whatever resources could be spared. These weren't the elaborate affairs of wealthy households, but simple markers that connected the family to broader community and historical rhythms. A special meal might be prepared using ingredients saved specifically for the occasion. Small gifts, often handmade during long evenings, would be exchanged. Songs or stories particular to the season would be shared. These celebrations provided psychological landmarks in the otherwise monotonous winter landscape. The social world contracted during severe weather but remained vitally important. Neighbouring farms maintained contact through occasional visits, weather permitting. News was shared, resources sometimes exchanged, mutual aid organised for those in particular need. A farmer with extra firewood might share with a widow whose supply ran low. A family blessed with a good dairy cow might bring butter to neighbours with none. These weren't just acts of charity, but pragmatic investments in community survival. Today's giver might be tomorrow's recipient. The harsh reality of Edwardian winter forged interdependence that transcended normal social boundaries. Churches remained operational regardless of weather, though attendance might drop during the worst conditions. Sunday services provided not just spiritual comfort, but essential social connection. After worship, people lingered to exchange news, arrange assistance, and simply enjoy human contact beyond their immediate household. Ministers or pastors made efforts to check on isolated parishioners during extreme weather. These visits served both spiritual and practical purposes, bringing comfort to the lonely while ensuring no one had fallen through the community safety net. The village doctor, if one existed locally, might make emergency calls regardless of conditions. Stories abound of heroic journeys through snowstorms to reach patients in need. These medical professionals, still relatively rare in rural areas, were treasured community resources whose health and safety everyone had a stake in protecting. Local knowledge became increasingly valuable as winter deepened. Which road would remain passable longest after a snow? Which spring never froze completely? Which elder in the village could predict weather changes with uncanny accuracy? This collective wisdom, accumulated over generations and shared freely, multiplied each individual's chances of survival. Children experienced deep winter differently than adults. For them, snow transformed familiar landscapes into magical playgrounds, sledding down hillsides, building snow figures, engaging in snowball battles. These activities provided exercise and joy during otherwise restricted days. Adults might join briefly, recapturing moments of lightheartedness amid serious concerns. School attendance became erratic during severe weather. Rural schools might close completely during blizzards or when temperatures dropped below certain thresholds. Education continued informally at home, reading by firelight, arithmetic lessons disguised as games, practical skills taught through daily activities. Throughout these challenging weeks, Edwardian farm families maintained hope by looking for signs of winter's eventual retreat. These weren't just pleasant observations, but critical intelligence about changing conditions that would affect planning and work. The gradual lengthening of days was noted and celebrated. A cock's stride was the traditional measure. Each day after winter solstice brought sunlight extended by roughly the length of a rooster's step. By early February, the difference became noticeable without measurement, precious additional minutes of evening light for outdoor tasks. Bird behavior provided reliable indicators. The first appearance of robins or the changing songs of resident species signaled shifts too subtle for human senses to detect directly. Experienced farmers paid attention to these avian messengers, adjusting plans and expectations accordingly. Plant life, even in apparent dormancy, responded to changing light and temperature. Snowdrops might push through frozen ground in protected spots. Willow stems took on a yellowish hue as sap began rising imperceptibly. Buds on certain trees swelled slightly, promising rather than delivering spring's renewal. The quality of light itself transformed gradually. The low, harsh winter sun gave way to something softer, warmer, with a different quality of illumination. This change is difficult to measure, but was intuitively recognized by people whose survival depended on close observation of natural cycles. Weather patterns began subtle shifts. Perhaps the snow that fell was wetter, heavier. Perhaps the ice that formed was less substantial, quicker to melt. The wind might carry occasional hints of less frigid air. These changes came inconsistently, with frequent retreats back into winter's grip, but their periodic appearance provided psychological sustenance. Farm animals sensed the coming transition. Sheep became restless as lambing season approached. Chickens might increase egg production slightly. Cattle showed more energy on milder days. These behavioral changes were noted carefully, interpreted through generations of accumulated observation. The human body itself responded to the seasonal shift. Appetite patterns changed subtly. Energy levels fluctuated with the strengthening sun. Sleep requirements might decrease marginally. The Edwardian farmer, attuned to his own physical responses as much as external conditions, recognized these internal harbingers of spring. With these first tentative signs came practical preparations for the seasonal transition. Seeds stored carefully through winter were checked for viability. Farm implements were given final repairs before the busy growing season. Breeding schedules for livestock were reviewed and adjusted. Planning turned increasingly towards spring activities. Fields would need preparation once thaws came permanently. Gardens would require attention. Lambing, calving, and other spring livestock events would demand round-the-clock monitoring. The relative quiet of deep winter would soon give way to the controlled frenzy of growth and renewal. But these preparations remained somewhat theoretical while winter maintained its grip. February often brought the heaviest snows, the most treacherous ice, the greatest challenges to stored food supplies. The promise of spring existed alongside the continuing reality of winter's dominance. This tension between hope and current hardship characterized the Edwardian rural experience of late winter. The family both anticipated better days and remained fully engaged with present challenges. This dual awareness created resilience, allowing them to endure immediate difficulties while maintaining vision of eventual relief. As February progressed into March, the balance gradually shifted. Thaws lasted longer. Frozen ground softened periodically. Birdsong increased in frequency and variety. Light extended noticeably into evening hours. These changes were celebrated quietly, without excessive optimism that might be crushed by winter's inevitable temporary returns. Inside the farmhouse, small adjustments reflected the changing season. Perhaps fire management became slightly less critical, with shorter periods of maximum heating needed. Food supplies remained carefully rationed, but with increased confidence that they would last until fresh options became available. Winter clothing was still worn, but perhaps with the occasional omission of an extra layer. Evening activities began, including more discussion of coming seasons. Garden plans were debated, field rotations considered, livestock breeding decisions finalized. These conversations had practical purposes, but also served as verbal rehearsals for the preferred future: spring's renewal and summer's abundance. The psychological burden of winter began to lift incrementally. The oppressive sense of endurance gave way to anticipation. The family's mood lightened with the lengthening days, not abandoning caution, but tempering it with measured optimism. This psychological shift was as important as any physical preparation for spring. Winter survival required a particular mental discipline, focus on immediate needs, conservation of all resources, careful management of expectations. The transition to spring mentality involved calculated risk-taking, investment of resources for future return, expanded horizons of possibility. Through all these subtle changes, the fundamental rhythms of farm life continued. Morning chores, midday meals, evening gatherings. The Edwardian farm family maintained the structures that had carried them through winter's darkest days, gradually modifying rather than abandoning proven routines. Night temperatures remained dangerously low, even as daytime warming increased. Evening fire banking continued with the same care. Bedrooms stayed frigid. Extra blankets remained necessary. The contrast between day and night conditions grew more pronounced, requiring flexibility in clothing and activity planning. The farm animals responded to changing conditions with increased energy and sometimes challenging behavior. Horses grew friskier, requiring careful handling. Cattle became more restless in their winter quarters. Sheep approaching lambing needed closer monitoring. These shifts created additional work but signaled welcome movement towards spring's renewal. As March established itself, the first true spring activities became possible during milder periods, perhaps pruning fruit trees on a sunny afternoon, maybe repairs to fences damaged by winter storms, possibly even some preliminary soil preparation in particularly well-drained areas. These tasks were approached cautiously, with awareness that winter could reassert itself at any moment. The transitional weeks brought their own unique challenges. Mud became nearly omnipresent as frozen ground thawed, creating difficult conditions for both humans and animals. Paths that had been easily navigated when frozen became treacherous quagmires. Boots required frequent cleaning. Animals needed extra attention to prevent hoof problems. Temperature fluctuations, freezing at night, thawing by day, created dangerous ice conditions each morning. Water expanded as it froze, contracted as it melted, then refroze in new configurations. These cycles made familiar terrain unpredictable, requiring heightened attention to prevent injuries from falls. Rain replaced snow as the predominant precipitation, bringing different challenges. Whereas snow could be shoveled aside, rain soaked everything and created drainage issues. Waterproof clothing, often treated canvas or wool coated with lanolin, became essential. Dripping garments hung near the fire created steamy conditions in the kitchen. The farmhouse itself responded to changing weather, expanding and contracting with temperature shifts. The structure might develop new creaks and leaks. Roofs that had shed snow effectively now needed to channel rain. Gutters required clearing of winter debris to prevent overflow and potential water damage to walls. Yet despite these challenges, the overall trajectory was positive. Each day brought incremental improvement in conditions. Each week saw tangible evidence of winter's retreating power. The balance tipped gradually but inexorably towards spring's renewal. Food options slowly expanded as the first new growth appeared. Wild greens, dandelions, nettles, sorrel could be gathered from sheltered spots. These bitter but nutritious plants were welcomed additions to the winter-limited diet. Rich in vitamins after months of preserved foods, they provided both nutrition and variety. The farm's stored eggs, carefully preserved through winter, could be replaced with increasing fresh production as daylight stimulated laying. Milk yields began rising as cattle responded to changing conditions and early growth appeared in pastures. These small improvements in food quality and quantity provided physical and psychological nourishment. Community activities increased with improving weather. Neighbours visited more frequently, planning for shared spring work, perhaps exchanging labour for ploughing or lambing, created anticipation of increased social connection. Churches might hold special services marking the seasonal transition, providing spiritual recognition of nature's renewal. Markets resumed more regular operations as travel became easier. The range of available goods expanded somewhat. News circulated more freely. These connections to the wider world reduced the isolation that characterized deep winter, reminding the farm family that they were part of broader human networks. By late March, genuine spring work became possible during favourable periods. The first seeds might be planted in sheltered garden areas. Fields could be prepared on drier days. Livestock could be released briefly into pastures for exercise and the first tentative grazing. These activities required careful timing and remained subject to weather setbacks, but their very possibility signalled winter's weakening hold. Through all these transitional experiences, the Edwardian farm family maintained the resilience developed during winter's challenges. They approached spring cautiously, conserving resources until renewal was certain, preserving the habits of care and attention that had ensured survival through the darkest days. Their experience of seasonal transition differed profoundly from our modern relationship with winter. Without instant heating, grocery stores, weather forecasting apps, or emergency services, they navigated changing conditions through direct observation, accumulated wisdom, and community support. They felt the turning of the year in their bodies, their work, their daily calculations of resource use. Looking back across more than a century, we might see their lives as unimaginably difficult, their winter endurance as almost superhuman, yet they themselves would likely have seen nothing extraordinary in their seasonal adaptations. This was simply life as they knew it, challenging certainly, but navigable through knowledge, preparation, and community. Perhaps there's something valuable for us in remembering their experience. In our climate-controlled modern lives, we've gained tremendous comfort and safety, but possibly lost something of our ancestors' intimate connection to natural cycles. Their necessary attentiveness to subtle environmental changes, their careful stewardship of limited resources, their interdependence with community and landscape, these might offer wisdom for our own uncertain future. As we lie warm in our beds, perhaps we can appreciate both the distance we've travelled from the Edwardian winter experience and the threads that still connect us to those resilient farmers, the desire for warmth and light in darkness, the satisfaction of shared meals in cold seasons, the hope that rises with lengthening days, the fundamental human capacity to endure difficulty while maintaining vision of better times. The Edwardian farm family, gradually emerging from winter's grip into spring's promise, reminds us of both human vulnerability and remarkable adaptability. Their winter survival required physical preparation, certainly, but equally important were the less tangible resources. knowledge passed through generations, community bonds that transcended individual limitations, the psychological resilience to maintain hope during the darkest days. As the cycle of seasons turned for them, winter yielding reluctantly to spring, dormancy giving way to growth, conservation transforming into creation, they participated in rhythms as old as agriculture itself. Their particular historical moment shaped the details of their experience, but the fundamental patterns connected them to ancestors and descendants alike. And now, as you feel the weight of your own blankets, the comfort of your pillow, the peaceful transition towards sleep, perhaps you carry a small appreciation for those long-ago farmers who navigated winter's challenges with such remarkable skill and endurance. And with that thought, close your eyes and drift off to sleep.